Last week, US President Donald Trump did what he does best: send the world into an absolute spin with his statements. This time, he wasn't declaring a ceasefire on India's behalf, but rather publicly telling Apple CEO Tim Cook this about the company's rapid expansion in India.
I said, Tim, look, we've treated you really good. We put up with all the plants that you built in China for years. Now you got to build us. We're not interested in you building in India. India can take care of themselves. They're doing very well. We want you to build here, and they're going to be upping their production in the United States. Apple. So Apple's already in for $500 billion.
To be sure, there's not been any halt or cutback from Apple or its suppliers on their investments in India, which is its fourth largest market by sales and one of the fastest growing in terms of its manufacturing footprint. Apple is in fact doubling down on its India footprint ahead of upcoming launches in September. But since we're living in reality show-like times, where keeping up with the Kardashians seems less dramatic than keeping up with Trump, we decided to cut through the clutter and bring you all you need to know about what's happening with Apple in India and the kind of role that India is expected to play in their global supply chain through partners like Foxconn and Tata Electronics. So, will Trump's statements force Apple to cut back their India investments? How will Apple's suppliers in India react? Does this mean the end of the India iPhone growth story? How realistic is a pivot from China for Apple? Is making an iPhone in the US feasible for Apple? How has Foxconn, as Apple's largest supplier, gone about their India operations? What is the ground reality when it comes to things like housing at a plant? Basically, will Trump make sure Apple's gravy train slows down in India? We answer all this and more in today's episode, where we get one of my colleagues to give us a ground report from Foxconn's newest facility, as well as an ace analyst to take us through the implications of Trump's policies and Apple's strategy for India. It's Thursday, May 22nd. I'm your host, Dia Rekhi, and you are listening to The Morning Brief from The Economic Times. Let's start off with some numbers that I thought you should definitely mull over. ET had reported on March 31st that Foxconn was planning to produce up to 25 to 30 million iPhones at its India plants this year, which is more than double the number it made last year. Why is this significant? Because Foxconn is Apple's largest contract manufacturer, and on May 1st, Apple CEO Tim Cook said that for the June quarter, Apple expects a majority of iPhones sold in the US to have India as their country of origin. So basically, it's go time for India. And just so you know, a key factor to achieve those numbers for Foxconn is going to be their operations at their new facility near Bangalore. ET had reported early this week that this particular unit is likely to start shipping iPhones as early as June, and that the final checks are going on right now to start commercial shipments from the new plant. And all of this is part of Foxconn's mega ambitious Project Elephant. Here's my colleague Suraksha P.
So Project Elephant is part of Foxconn's China Plus One strategy to diversify its production away from China. Foxconn, as you know, is one of the primary suppliers of Apple iPhones and its components, apart from Tata Electronics in India that acquired both Wistron and Pegatron, who are erstwhile suppliers of Apple. As you said, the Devanahalli plant is one of Foxconn's largest facilities. Foxconn is building this facility, which is said to be modern, to assemble about 20 million smartphones annually. This is on a 300-acre plot. It is spread across 2 villages, which are called Doddagollahalli and Chapparadahalli villages. This is in the Devanahalli Taluk. And this is about 34 kilometers away from the Kempegowda International Airport, which is good for logistics and, transporting cargo. Right. Now, the state government here has also said that Foxconn's mobile assembly unit is expected to provide employment opportunities for around 50,000 people. And as far as investments in phase-wise goes, there are three phases. The first phase, the state government said that it started in 2023. And that had an investment of about 3,000 crores. The plant is expected to produce about 1 lakh iPhones by December 2025, which is the end of this year. So big ambitions.
Indeed. I mean, 1 lakh by the end of this year is quite insane. Suraksha, you visited the Foxconn facility. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you saw there? I mean, how does the plant look? What stage is the construction at? What did the employees there tell you?
First things first, the press is not allowed inside the plant. So I don't know what the plant looks like from the inside. But what I do know from the employees I spoke to in the campus are that there are buildings, separate buildings and units that are called NHB Foxconn Elephant Project. NHB stands for Neo Heights. And then there is the Godrej and Boyce Foxconn Project Office. And then there is a Foxconn Apple Project. And there is an NCC Foxconn patching plant. And this is, of course, apart from the dormitory buildings that you and I wrote about.
Let's talk a little bit more about the dormitories, Suraksha. I mean, these will house Foxconn employees who are working at the plant. So how is that coming along?
It's definitely ongoing. It is not completed. Around 30,000 employees are set to be housed there when the construction wraps up at the end of this year. And on the far side of the campus, where the dormitories are being built, we could see from the outside, we as in, our ET photojournalist and I, we saw that there are rows of 10-story buildings that are being completed. And these are the dorm facilities. So sources told ET that as a part of their plan for Karnataka, the dorms were always a part of it. And they said that, the civil construction is ongoing and the electricity and plumbing is expected to be in the next stage. And, to be clear for our listeners, these dorms are only for the operators and the laborers. These are not for the executives of Foxconn.
What about the living arrangements for workers and executives? I mean, is the comparison really stark?
Yes. First of all, now currently those 30,000 odd employees, they travel from all corners of Bangalore. Now, there are both male and female employees. As we know, Foxconn has always had a history of hiring more women than men for the nimble work that their hands do. Right. So they have a very good cab facilities that, pick them up and drop them wherever they want to go, and no matter what shift they're in. And now, a lot of men said that, this, traveling from far and wide, the dorms will help with avoiding that once they're ready. And there were these male employees who mentioned that there are shared paying guest accommodations opposite colleges in Devanahalli with that charge around 7,000 per month, for sharing a room with around 3 people. So right. That's a modest living arrangement. And I mean, I must give credit where it's due. They were very happy. The employees, be it salary, be it increments, be it work, they were very happy. And surprisingly, not one of them complained about traveling to Devanahalli for work. Now, as far as the Taiwanese executives are concerned, that's a different story altogether. So now there are senior level Foxconn employees who've flown in from Taiwan to train these guys. And they have rented residential apartments in the vicinity of the facility. And the rent, you won't believe it, it starts from 2.5 lakh. So that's a big rent amount. Yeah. And so the Taiwanese living arrangements are at a whole different level.
Yes, no, sure. This is really crazy. But the other way to look at it is that given the fact that Foxconn is this massive supplier to Apple and the way they're spreading out their business and presence in India, it almost seems like they're replicating their ecosystem, which they've set up in China, right? And it only goes to show that Apple is here and is not really going anywhere. But I want to come back to the operations at the plant. I'm guessing assembly is already in full swing because we had just reported that shipments are expected as early as June, right?
Yes, dear. So the female employees did confirm that assembly of iPhones has already started. And, the women said those who were working in assembly operations, they said that they're working across shifts, and this also includes night shifts. So they did confirm that the commercial assembly of iPhones has already started. And I think they're on track for the shipments next month.
Interesting. And Suraksha, before I let you go, do you have any idea what iPhone models are being assembled in there?
There's no way to know what Foxconn in Devanahalli assembles because Apple refused to divulge those details. As we all know, Apple is going to launch iPhone 17 in September. And currently, what the market is selling, the latest version of iPhone 16 and iPhone 16 Plus, that is what is selling in the market. But I think it is iPhone 16 Plus and iPhone 16 that they are assembling there.
Now, I know that you're thinking that this is all very well, but what happens to future investments? Will Trump constantly singling out Apple force them to reconsider their investments? Analysts and experts don't seem to think so. Daniel Ives, who's the head of technology research at Wedbush Securities, said that the firm believes Apple could ramp iPhone assembly production in India up to 60 to 65% by the fall in a best case scenario, but could also easily pivot back to a China-driven iPhone strategy depending on the tariff situation and deal negotiations. What's important though is that he said he sees no chance that iPhone production starts to happen in the US in the near term because of, and I quote, the upside-down cost model and Herculean-like supply chain logistics needed for such an initiative. End quote. Let's see what another expert thinks though. Here's Tarun Pathak, Research Director at Counterpoint Research. I just wanted to start off by asking you how you responded when you heard that statement that Donald Trump made, where he said that Tim Cook should not have Apple building in India.
So when we first heard the news, the first reaction was like, it's a classic Trump thing, right? Which, like, in a sense, he wanted Apple to look more inward and start investing more in US. And since Trump came into power, I think one of the biggest agenda is to get more investments back in US from the manufacturing point of view. But there are a lot of variables attached to it, and it's not that simple as it look on the paper, like to tell one of the largest companies in the world to just shift manufacturing overnight in US. And there are a lot of other elements to it, which we can deep dive into it, why this is not likely to happen anytime soon.
But, Tarun, to give our listeners a sense of what exactly is happening, I mean, we've seen Apple really doubling down on their India operations for some time now, right? And
Right.
I wanted to understand from you, is this just about diversifying away from China, or will this now become, building in the US? How feasible is that really?
So I think, like I said, there are different elements to it. So for example, if you look at from the diversification point of view, it all started just before the tariffs and all those discussion. Actually, it started during the COVID times, and everyone started to diversify their strategies. Now, some of those alternative countries that emerge out were Vietnam, India, you have Brazil, you have a bit of Indonesia and some of other companies. But between the China, Vietnam, and India, 90% of the manufacturing is happening worldwide. But India has a lot of positives, not only just the large domestic market, but at the same time, you can export from India. And our policy was shaping up really well. We moved on from Make in India face manufacturing program to PLI that was working in that favor. So I don't see any other reason why not just Apple, other companies as well, not looking into India as a possible alternate destination beyond China to scale up their manufacturing ambitions.
Got it. Tarun, could you give our listeners an idea of the biggest suppliers that Apple has in India currently? From my understanding, it would be Foxconn and Tata Electronics. But could you also give us a sense of what their operations are like currently, as well as how much you see them scaling up? Also, if you could shed some light maybe on the opportunity that is there for Indian enterprises, because we're seeing that Apple is engaging in talks with a lot of smaller Indian companies that could be part of their global value chain.
Yeah, I guess that's the larger blueprint of this GVCs, right? You engage with a lot of these suppliers. The talks are ongoing, and then they onboard them, and that's how the entire industry works. But from the overall scale perspective, like right now, the numbers what we had is like Apple has been making almost like 18% of the global iPhones work from India assembly manufacturing. So thanks to all these suppliers like Foxconn and Tata, that are actually scaling up. So that's a good thing, because the moment player like Foxconn or Tata's or even supply chain, Apple supply chain invest in one particular country, it just doesn't bring the names, but it also brings the confidence for a lot of these suppliers that these companies are here to stay.
Sure. Tarun, the other thing is that, for the longest time, we've been saying that, India is an alternative destination to China for manufacturing of, say, for instance, iPhones in this case, right? But how realistic is it really for Apple to pivot away from China? Because the smallest of small components are coming in from China. And while we have Indian companies really stepping up, how far behind are we really?
We are behind, but the way we look at things is in terms of gap, right? So I think the one of the best thing to look at for any supply chain is year on year, are we narrowing the gap or is it like flattish or the same, right? So the way we look at it, the gap is being narrowed down year on year. But for us, one of the biggest challenge is the skill set. I think that is where China really excels, because they imbibe that culture at the right from the very beginning in terms of the entire electronic supply chain being rooted and the ecosystem approach what they have taken decades ago. And I think what we need to do is bring in the same kind of awareness. The future is all about semiconductors, right? Localizing it is very, very important. What we have seen, obviously, during the recent war, how important is for us to localize some of our electronics that even goes into defense. So I think it's no brainer now. It's not like a choice for us. We have to do it, but how soon or how far we are it also depends on how the supply chain looks at India, possible alternate destination to China. So I think we are at the right path, but it all depends on how the suppliers will look at in India going forward as an alternate destination to ramp up manufacture.
Absolutely. Tarun, I have to ask you, do you see anything changing because of, the US and China's latest pact, right? They seem to have
Yeah.
called off the tensions at least momentarily. So does that spell trouble for India's manufacturing ambitions at all?
I don't think so. So, and the reason why I don't think so, because the entire GVC global value chain runs on stability and trust as well. Because if maybe the situation is positive for now, but it's still uncertain, right? And Trump's tenure just started. So a lot of the times the supply chain look at a country where things are more stable, and still it's 30%, right? And 30% is huge from the certain companies' perspective, where the scale runs into like millions, multi-millions, right? So India is, I don't see any impact right now, because most of these companies have invested over a period of years, 7 years, 8 years in India, and that doesn't stop these operations overnight. Like I said, the GBCs run on very certain and trusted environments. That is where we see most of these companies do not take a hasty decision right now, and I think they'll still continue to diversify beyond China, and India remains an alternate destination for most of the suppliers in the next decade or so.
Patrick McGee, the Financial Times' Apple correspondent, who's authored Apple in China, The Capture of the World's Greatest Company, was recently on a show where he said,
I would love to see a massive acceleration of Apple moving to India, but you need the political air cover from Donald Trump and the administration to actually do that, because China's not going to allow it. They have them over a barrel.
Patrick is right. Apple is intricately tied to China. Their exposure to the country is enormous. Their supply chain dependence, possibly more than we can even fathom. Building supply chain resilience for Apple is critical for their operations, and India could really make use of this opportunity. The question is whether Donald Trump will provide that political air cover that Patrick spoke about. Also, maybe we'll get him to speak on the podcast soon so that he can break things down further and take us through all things Apple. So stay tuned. Thank you, Suraksha and Tarun. Queries sent to Apple and Foxconn remained unanswered as of Wednesday. It's Thursday, May 22nd. I'm your host, Dia Rekhi, and you are listening to The Morning Brief from The Economic Times. This episode was produced by Vinay Joshi and Rajas Nayak. Sound design by Indraneel Bhattacharjee. Executive producers Anirban Chaudhary and Arijit Burman. A new episode of The Morning Brief drops every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, wherever you get your podcasts. All external sound clips used in this episode belong to their respective owners. Credits are mentioned in the description.